Hello, I'm the Grub Street blogger, and you join me on a bright and beautiful February day. Now, February is the shortest month, so let's make this a short video. The first book I read this month was The Adventures of Uncle Lubin. It was another book I read to the children, and, this is how I read it. I strapped a camera to my spectacles because I needed to show them the pictures. Not only because the pictures are wonderful, but because the pictures are part of the story. It actually says in it, they trussed me up like this, and then it shows a picture of it. It's written by Edward? Oh, I call him Edward. Is he called Edward? Heath Robinson, W. Heath Robinson, who was a cartoonist. And he lived just down the road, and I went to the Heath Robinson Museum back in the day when we could go to museums. Then I picked up this book, and it's, let's say, I read it to children, but once again I read it to children over camera, and I don't know what their reaction was. However, I enjoyed this book more than when I read a book to children last month. It's very, very simple. It's about this uncle who his nephew is stolen by the evil big mouth bird, and he goes to rescue it. And there are like sea serpents he has to deal with, and other problems and animals, and they're all very fanciful. And it's all written in a very simple style. It's not a long book. It's very pleasant. And what I liked was the uncle is not necessarily a brave person. He's he's just an uncle, but he has to find the resources within himself to rescue his nephew. And yeah, I really liked it. It was a really good book, and the pictures are wonderful. I really like Heath Robinson, even if I can't remember his first name. I think it's William. Oh well. Second book then, The Female Quixote, or was it Quixote? I know the book is Don Quixote, but I've heard people call this The Female Quixote, by Charlotte Lennox. I'd read another Charlotte Lennox a little while ago. I not particularly enjoyed it. I hadn't liked how Lennox put the women characters. They had to be better than the men to be as good as the men. She was very cruel to the characters that didn't meet her standard. There wasn't really much of that in this. It's all about Arabella. She is a woman who she's been brought up in a castle all by herself, and there's been an accident in the library, and all the sort of big French romance books, like the ones by Scudery, things like Cyrus the Great and things, have been put in the history section because they're called histories, even though they're not historical. And she's got really into them, she's read them, and she's got an encyclopedic knowledge about all these things. And she lives her life according to the principles in them. Like Don Quixote deciding to be the soul of chivalry. And so, yeah, you have those kind of comic things where she sees something that isn't really there. So there's a gardener, and he talks a little bit posh because he's a gardener who's been in another employment where he's had to improve his language and things. So she sees him not as a gardener, but as a prince in disguise coming to woo her and things like this. And this is of great pain to her cousin Glanville. Her father has basically set her and her cousin up before he died, and Glanville quite likes Arabella. Well, he very much likes her. He finds her very beautiful, he finds her very clever, he finds her perfect, except for this delusion that she has. And she just embarrasses him wherever they go, to the point that he bites his lips till blood flows at one point. And then at the end, Arabella's argued out of her delusions, which is a bit of a weak ending, to be honest. I would have preferred it had, because Glanville kind of goes through sort of what the hero in these stories goes through bit by bit. If she'd then seen that and gone, oh, he is the hero from these big romances, and he is, that would have been better, I think. The very best part is where there's another suitor and he's savvy with the literature. It's called Sir George, and what he does is he tells his life history in the way they do in these books, and he tells it like one of those romances. So he says he is the deposed the son or great great grandson of the deposed King of Kent, and he wants to win back his throne in Kent. And he fights off 500 men by standing against a tree so no one can come behind him. And he has three loves of his life, who are the ultimate love of his life, but he has three of them. And she doesn't see through the fact he's bullshitting her, which everyone else does, and they're all taking the piss. She dislikes the fact he has three loves of his life. So he's done. I found it really fun, actually. Don Quixote, you get a sense that Cervantes really does dislike this literature, and he blames it for people going off and trying to be brave and sort of celebrating the martial. Whereas Charlotte Lennox seems to really love these silly romances. She knows they're silly, and she presents them as silly, and it's big part of the story is if you live your life like this, you're gonna be pretty ridiculous. But she seems to really love them, and that love comes through, and it's a far nicer book than Don Quixote in that sense, and it's pretty enjoyable. It's a little dry at first, and she has this encyclopedic knowledge of these books that none of us really. I mean, I haven't read any Scudery or anything like that, so it does get a bit old when she keeps going over these names. They all have fanciful names. Everything that happens, she says, "Oh yeah, that's like Statira and Orringer and all these people," and it does get a bit old. But at the same time, it reminds me a little bit of sort of a Stuart Lee joke where he keeps telling the same joke again and again, and it's no longer funny, and then he keeps doing it, and then it grows back into funny again. There seems to be that kind of play going on. I did enjoy it. I thought it was pretty good. Charlotte Lennox, the female Quixote. The next thing I read was Julie Orringer, How to Breathe Underwater. This is a collection of short stories in my massive pile of things I plan to read. There's a few collections of short stories that I have bought and read one or two stories, and so I thought, well, let's read the whole lot. And this was this one. I got this for my master's about 13 years ago, quite a while ago now, and I read one story and remember liking it, but don't remember anything about it. So I read through this. They're all about young women finding themselves who are sort of fish out of water, learning to breathe underwater kind of thing. They're all outsiders who either you get their outsiderness sort of solidified, or they learn to overcome it, or they learn to live with it, or they learn to see the strengths of it. In terms of the stories, the very best story in it is called The Isabel Fish. That is actually a really, really good story. It's about a girl who was involved in a car crash, and the guilt she feels for being involved in that car crash, and her relationship with her brother, because she was in the car with the brother's girlfriend, and so it strained their relationship. It's about how they come together. It's really, really sweet. And then, I mean, there are two almost identical stories where the moral seems to be don't let children by themselves in the back garden. Something horrible is going to happen. The trouble with the book is it does that short story thing. When I read all those short stories for We All Hear Stories in the Dark, that was a different kind of short story. That was absurdist a lot of the time. It was high concept a lot of the time. It was an interesting idea that shaped into the story. With this, you get some good characters, and then you almost get this sort of, oh fuck, I need some story, and so something horrible happens. Oh no, I need a theme. And so, there are two stories about cancer in this. There's rape, there's murder, there's accidental death, there's jealousy, and you read, if you do just sit and read them all, one, you kind of see the mechanics of it, of, oh, something needs to happen, big shocking horrible thing. But also, it presents this sort of worldview where everybody's life is really unpleasant and formed by these terrible things, and it was just too much, but also just not only not enjoyable as a collection, but just not true. I think there needed to be more variation in the stories for it to be a great collection. I think, but the Isabel Fish, particularly, is a brilliant short story. The next thing I read was Nights at the Circus by Angela Carter, and I absolutely love this book. This book was so good. It's about a woman called Feathers who lives at the turn of the 20th century, and she is a trapeze artist who has wings, or may not, but does. And the first part is her telling her life to this journalist, and then she goes on a circus tour into Russia, and the journalist follows her as a clown in order to carry on with the story and find out more. And then there's a section in St. Petersburg where it's behind the scenes of the circus, and you see the clown subculture, which is creepy as. And all the animals are really, really intelligent. There's the clever monkeys, who are probably the cleverest characters in the book, but also things like tigers. There are waltz-in tigers and things like this. It's really cool. There's a pig who can read the future, and then the last part is in Siberia, where they find themselves stranded and split up and have little adventures before coming back together. What I loved about it is it does that Dickensy thing. One thing I relate to Dickens, it's not like Dickens, it doesn't read like Dickens at all, but it is bursting. It's like there's so much stuff in here, it's almost like the book's like, oh, out, it all comes. And it's so, there were loads of literary things going on. There's lots of points of view shifts. Some of them were a little bit too clunky. There was one bit where for only that part the narrator comes in and says, yes, we're in St. Petersburg and I know there's going to be terrible history happening here. And you're like, oh, I know that too, but if it's not happening in the story, you probably don't need to mention it. But for the most part, it's very fluid. At one point I'm like, oh, this has moved into present tense. When did this happen? And then it's not present tense anymore. And it's so smooth, you don't notice these things. And each section has a slightly different point of view. And yet, within those, there's also these sort of points of view that come weave in and out. But it's very, very rarely distracting. And you suddenly think, oh, this is different to how it was. When did it change? Because it's so smoothly done, and the language is lovely. It's just bursting. It's such a good book, and best book of the month, and going to be in the top 10 at the end of the year, without a doubt. Easy peasy. Now the next book I read because the idea of it reminded me of Nights at the Circus, and it's called The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock by Imogen Hermes Gowar. And in many ways, what was great about Nights at the Circus was not great about The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock. For a start, the whole thing is narrated in omniscient third person present tense, which I don't think I've ever read anything like that before, and I can see why having read this, because it takes you away from stuff, in the omniscient third person, but the present tense is always immediate, so it's being not immediate and immediate at the same time, and it just jars constantly. And the narrative voice, the narrator who occasionally pops in, is not strong enough to wield the story together. So you have these characters, and in theory they're quite interesting characters, a lot of them. There's this merchant who's very stolid, but he is given this mermaid, and it's like a Fiji mermaid. I saw one in the Horniman Museum once. It's like a monkey sewn to a fish kind of thing. And he displays it, and this brings him into a different sphere where he meets courtesans and prostitutes, but high-class ones, including Angelica O'Neill, who they have a relationship, but it's a really weird relationship, because it seems founded on his loneliness and her need for a protector, but I think it's supposed to be romantic. But they never quite mesh, and then he goes and gets another mermaid, which is a real life mermaid. And actually, the best bit of the book is this real life mermaid, because it's not a physical thing; it's like a gestalt hive in the water. So there's no physical object in the water, but you see a mermaid in your mind. And it's made up of all like the specks of water. It's really cool. And also the mermaid creates this depression field essentially. And I think the idea, because they lock it in this grotto, I think the idea is it's our baggage for Angelica and Jonah, the merchant, to get together. They need to examine it and remove their baggage. And that's a really nice metaphor and things. Trouble is the writing. Not only this weird omniscient third person present tense thing, but she really likes to put in words that draw attention to themselves. So people are fossicking all the time in this book. Everyone's fossicking. And I've heard it written, it's done in, because it's set in the 18th century, which, I love a bit of 18th century. It's written in an 18th century style. But it's not, because there's it's nothing like that. And apart from anything else, the word fossick comes from the Australian gold rush. So it's not even like she's picking words that fit the time that are weird. She's just picking weird words. There's a bombazine crow at one point, and the crow sums up something that I found awkward about the book as well, because it's a transition between a place we've been and a place we're going to spend quite a lot of time in. So a crow flying across, yeah, that works, and it's kind of, it's more filmic than booky, I think, but yeah, it works. Trouble is, then the narrator quibbles, well, would the crow fly this distance? And then the narrator says, well, it doesn't really matter because it's not a real crow, we're only imagining it. Like, I know we are. And if the narrator had done things like that throughout, then that would have been a sort of narrating style. I mean, my favourite novel is Tom Jones, in which he's always getting involved in the book, whether he needs to or not. But this only happens at this one point, really. And so it just seems like a misstep. So all the reviews I've read have said, it's a bit of a slow, stodgy book, but with a beautiful style. And I think it's a quite interesting book with a stodgy style. There you go. Next, very short book, Essays on Dolls. These are these things called Penguin Sirens. They originally cost $2.99, which seems crazy amount of money. I got a bunch of them for free. And it's 3 essays about dolls, and I really enjoyed 2 of them. The first one, I say it's about dolls, it's not really. The first one is by Henrik von Kleist, who I've not heard of. But he wrote about marionettes and how marionettes are graceful because they don't have human self-consciousness. And there's a few anecdotes about human self-consciousness. There's a man who sees that he looks kind of like a statue and he tries to do the pose. And trying to do the pose, he loses his naturalness and he becomes ugly. And there's also a story about a sword fight with a bear. And these are supposedly true anecdotes. And so marionettes, because they're not thinking, they can move gracefully. And then that's linked to the notion of religious grace. Yeah, and the apple in Eden. We lost godly grace and we lost physical gracefulness, which, as you can tell. By the way, I move. I move a bit like a puppet. Yes, Mr. Tracy. Okay, then the next one's by Baudelaire, and it's Philosophy of Toys, and it's a whole bunch of his thoughts about toys. He's just sort of rambling. Ooh, I wonder what that's like. And he talks about how, poorer people's toys are better actually than richer people's toys, because richer people's toys have loads of detail, while poor people's toys, they can get odds and ends and make an army out of it, or they can make a carriage out of chairs, and it exercises the imagination, and how it's really good for humans in general, but children in particular, which I completely and utterly agree with. He has this horrible little misogyny moment in there, though, where pretending to be on a carriage, bouncing about on a chair is good, but pretending to be a mum with a dolly is bad. He says that's just that's just learning, copying your mum and learning how to be, the kind of pathetic person you're going to be in the future. And where's that come from? They're just the same thing as far as I can tell. But there you go. That's the Baudelaire essay. It's pretty good. The last one I absolutely hated, and it's by Rainer Maria Rilke, who's a poet, I believe. These are all authors I've not encountered before. I mean, I've heard of Baudelaire and Rilke, and it's about dolls, and it's about souls, and he's got this idea that things have souls, and it's kind of sweet, you know. Your hairbrush is there to be, it has a little helpful soul. It wants you to brush your hair, or your glasses there. They have, an exacting soul. They want to be, correct and specific. The trouble is, what does not have a soul is a doll, because if you have a doll, it sucks your affection, and it doesn't use it. It's like a vampire, and he's talking about, the only way a doll could get to heaven is if it's being hugged by a dying child, because a doll has no soul. And again, there seems to be this weird misogynist thing that, boys' toys, it talks about rocking horses and toy soldiers and things, and they're great. They have the spirit of adventure, they have adventurous souls, but dolls don't. And it almost seems like he's personally offended that he cared for a doll when he was younger and it didn't give him love back. It almost seems like there's something wrong with him and his childhood in this. And I think a doll, or puppets and things like that, I think it's more of a reflection of your soul. You put your soul in and have it reflect back. So if he got nothing out of it, I think that says more about his soul than about dolls, to be honest. But yeah, for a very skinny book, a lot of thoughts. And the last thing I read, I'm actually reading Mysteries of Adolfo at the moment, but it's long. I haven't finished it yet. Was this book here, in which I read Northanger Abbey. Got a weird relationship with Jane Austen. One of the last books I never finished was Pride and Prejudice, and whenever I've picked up any of her books, I've kind of been turned away. I can't quite get into them. But I did very much like her Juvenilia, and then I did very much like Lady Susan, which are all things she wrote when she was younger. And Northanger Abbey was published after she died, but was the first proper novel she wrote. And so, just after Lady Susan kind of thing. And so I thought, oh, okay, if I like her younger stuff, let's start with this first novel. And yes, I did enjoy it a great deal, actually. There's all the stuff about Gothic. Catherine is reading Mysteries of Adolfo, which led me onto it, and that taints or tinges her thoughts, and she sees Gothic things places where they're not, and gets into a few comic misunderstandings throughout because of it. I mean, I was actually expecting a bit more like a female Cote. I thought she was going to be completely addled with it, but no, it's only a little touch, really. The main thing is about her coming into the world and her innocence, and how she doesn't read people properly because she doesn't have the experience. So she makes this great friend who she says is really honest and upfront and transparent when she's obviously false as anything. And then there's this guy who obviously likes her and she doesn't like him. And it takes her a while to admit she doesn't like him because she's a nice person. But he thinks he's getting somewhere with her and he's not. And she doesn't even realise he likes her. And then, of course, there's the guy she does like, who I really enjoyed. He was a little bit snarky and a little bit sarcastic, but not in a nasty way. He'd just been around a bit, and he was like, we're in Bath. What do you think? Yeah, it's Bath. It does its Bath stuff. He was a good character. I liked him a lot. I liked the book a lot. My favourite character was Mrs. Allen, who is the woman who Catherine's been taken to Bath with. She's not related. Their neighbours. And Mrs. Allen is just really stupid, and either she gets more stupid as the book goes on, or it just becomes more apparent how stupid she is. She's so dumb, she can't think of anything particularly to say, but she can't be quiet either. So she just narrates what's happening. She's just like, carriage is going past, sun shining, I'm sitting. Do you like my clothes? Yeah, I found her really enjoyable. Yeah, it was good. I still don't think I can pick up an Austen and go, "Oh, good, Austen, can't wait." But I'm warming. I'm getting the snark a bit more. I'm getting the wittiness a bit more. Yeah, so there will be some more Austen as the year progresses. And that's what I read in February. Thank you very much.